Hello, my name is Philip Alston. I'm a professor at New York University School of Law, and I was previously the United Nations Special Rapporteur on extreme poverty and human rights. As I suspect you will know, I had the pleasure of visiting Spain in early 2020, just before the COVID-19 pandemic struck. One of the most striking moments of the time that I spent in Spain was when I visited the workers in Lepe working on the very picking jobs that were available in Huelva, contributing to the $500 million or €500 million industry in that area. I described in my report how shocked I was at the conditions that I saw. And of course, this meeting is very familiar with exactly what happens to those workers, and I don't need to provide you with the terrible details. I was struck by the fact that the very first meeting that I had with a group of the immigrant workers started with a man from West Africa who immediately challenged me and asked, "Why should we bother talking with you? Your visit will make no difference. Many people come to see us and they express concern and nothing changes, nothing happens. We suspect that it will be the same with you." I tried to reassure that person and the group at large that it meant something for an expert from the United Nations to visit. And I gave him an assurance that I would do everything I could to try to draw attention to the terrible conditions. I'm happy to say that thanks to some of the groups that are with you today, thanks to the broader media in Spain, and thanks to a significant degree of international interest that was attracted, a significant momentum was built up around this issue. Tragically, it stopped with COVID-19 because, of course, attention turned elsewhere, even though in reality a lot of the workers were left stranded in Huelva and suffered even more than the rest of us during the peak of the pandemic. One of the questions, and I'm sure it's what you're going to be addressing today, is where do we go from here in terms of drawing attention and actually bringing real and lasting change in the lives of these deeply exploited and very inhumanely treated workers. The first step, of course, is acknowledgement. In other words, it's for the key actors, the government, the corporations who are involved, the direct employers, the intermediary contracting groups, and ultimately, of course, the consumers, to acknowledge, first of all, that the conditions are entirely unacceptable, and secondly, that action must be taken to remedy all of the major challenges. It's only once that acknowledgement is made that serious and sustained action is going to be possible. Of course, the law is important, And we've already seen that a number of not insignificant legal steps have at least been initiated to try to regulate the overall production and contracting process, to try to address the labor regime that applies. But there's a lot more than simply reforming the law. There needs to be a broader mobilization, and the key actors need to be prepared to devote resources to ensure that accommodation is provided, which is adequate, to ensure that labor contracts are regularized and that decent salaries are earned and paid, and that the overall conditions for workers are in accordance with Spanish law. How we get there is, of course, a major challenge. What we've seen is that the initial report that I made was useful in mobilizing other United Nations human rights actors. And in the months after my visit, a number of key groups have become actively and productively involved, including the Working Group on Human Rights and Business, the various special rapporteurs on migrants, on extreme poverty, and on a range of other issues, all of which are implicated. But of course, the United Nations is not going to change the situation. Human rights groups, and particularly the groups working on issues of gender and equality, the groups working on welfare and social protection, who played such a key role in relation to my visit, and others have to continue to mobilize. And ideally, it would be very good to see a broader coalition of human rights groups who have so far not been particularly active on this issue, of labor groups, unions. It's not acceptable, in my view, for trade unions to say, but these workers are not unionized, and so we're not going to advocate on their behalf. It's the old story that miserable labor conditions for anyone translate all the way up the line to encourage those who believe that minimum labor conditions, or more importantly, decent and proper labor conditions, are a minor consideration not to be given priority. That has to stop. It would be nice to see the International Labour Organization, for example, getting involved in this issue, particularly in Huelva, but also more broadly. I think it's very important to keep in mind that a framework of human rights is an indispensable basis on which this advocacy should proceed. There is a right to dignity for everyone, not just for the citizens of Spain or for people who are working, quote, legally, but for all workers in Spain. There's a right to non-discrimination. There's a right to gender equality. The abuses that women have endured in particular must be remedied, and it's the human rights framework that can help to draw attention to those essential requirements. Human rights provide a wide range of requirements as to conditions of labor, and they must be invoked. And the workers themselves have a right to adequate standard of living, to health, and to be treated, as I said earlier, with dignity. So I welcome the gathering that is taking place today in Huelva. And I very much hope that you will be able to give rise to a whole next phase of activism and advocacy, which will truly bring the conditions in the berry fields, the red berry fields around Huelva, up to a standard of which Spain can be proud, and that consumers of these much sought after fruits can finally feel that they are not actually complicit in exploitative practices of the past, which have been truly shameful. I wish you well with your conference. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.